What up, y'all? It's Zavi D of Organic Health Movement, checking in to share my blueprint for navigating rejection, the tips, tricks, and methodology to incorporating authentic self-confidence, self-assurance, and self-esteem in the presence of the inherent disconnection present in interpersonal relationships. To begin, we have to understand that emotional pain is the source of our potential growth when it comes to rejection. Emotional pain is characterized by hurt, shame, and guilt. Hurt is synonymous with rejection for most individuals, and feeling hurt, in my experience, stems from the disappointment implicit in a lack of connection with another individual. The energy of rejection divides, whereas the energy of acceptance connects. The feeling of hurt can also represent a sense of shame or guilt, wherein we feel the instigating party has highlighted some sense of inadequacy, inferiority, or a lack of self-worth within us. AKA, we feel we've done something wrong to deserve the rejection. Another component of emotional pain is apathy. Apathy is a state of being in which an individual who fears the direct experience of emotional pain associated with rejection is too afraid to confront that reality. Let us take the example of one who holds the door open for another individual with the hope of being acknowledged for his or her generosity, only to receive no such praise. Energetic stifling or apathy would represent the attitude of not giving a fuck or pretending nothing happened or pretending not to care about the incident in which we were not acknowledged or overlooked or undervalued. It's a form of aversion we use to withhold those painful experiences from our emotional center. There are two primary responses to rejection. One is repression and the other is projection. I find that repression primarily manifests as a victim mindset. What repression means is when we encounter rejection, we repress the associated emotions and become the victim of that other person's opinion and projection on us. So instead of reclaiming our power, instead of being in the presence of that emotion and allowing it to flow through us, we purposefully shove that down and avoid the sensations associated with that as a means of self-survival, as a means of mitigating the pain that we may experience if we really sit with that emotion for an extended period of time. Now, an individual who tends towards repression typically assumes a passive form of communication. And what I mean by that is when they are confronted about the things that trouble them most, they will either deny that they exist, as in the case of apathy, or they will choose to refer to the incident with little regard. So, oh, it wasn't that big of a deal. I guess I'm fine. Yeah, I don't know. He's just that way. Whatever you need to say to somebody else to make it seem like, man, this isn't a really big deal. Deep down, you know it is, but your attempt to repress that emotion causes you to drop into the state of really being afraid of not only representing for yourself, but fully, authentically experiencing the pain of rejection. Now, I really want to point out that repression can manifest in various ailments of the body and mind. This cannot be more true in our modern culture where we are afraid of expressing our truth and emotions, and therefore we end up in a state of disillusion where we can no longer integrate the sensory stimulus from our environment into an integrated personality with greater perseverance and passion than ever before. Rather, we default to suppressing the emotions which are uncomfortable, which we feel we would be ashamed or guilty of expressing, and therefore we fall into different disease states in which those trapped emotions within the body cause havoc and cause us to actually manifest disease in a really unfortunate way. Bringing some neuroscience into the picture, I'd like to reference this quote from The Body Keeps the Score by Dr. Bessel van der Kolk. In an extreme form, repression can be seen in chronic PTSD patients with severe early life trauma. In brain scans, there was almost no activation of the self-sensing areas of the brain. The MPFC, the anterior cingulate, the parietal cortex, the insula did not light up at all. The only area that showed a slight activation was the posterior cingulate, which is responsible for orientation in space. What we find here is that in repetitive exposure to trauma and or rejection, we have decreased activity in the self-sensing areas of the brain. What that is to say is that there are literal aspects of our physical being that turn off and disassociate from any sort of rejection and trauma as a means of self-preservation, as a means of keeping the emotions buried, tucked deep, deep within our psyche so that we don't have to confront them and obviously re-experience the visceral sensation of rejection, which is what happens when we heal. Projection is the opposite of repression. Projection involves the voluntary rejection of rejection. Let me clarify. When you are in the presence of somebody who rejects you, you have two options. You can absorb the emotion and suppress it, or you can relay that emotion back onto the person in front of you. So you can take the emotion, the anger, the frustration, and whatever they're projecting onto you, and you can send it right back their way in the form of aggressive communication, in the form of an inflammatory personality, in the form of an argumentative and divisive approach to interpersonal communication. Now, projection is a very interesting form of self-preservation. Projection allows us to take the pain that we are afraid of experiencing and push it back onto the person who sent it our way. Now, from a logical perspective, this makes absolute sense, but unfortunately, the way that projection works in our culture is we not only live in a very dishonest world as a result, but we live in a world where we are all too afraid to be completely honest with ourselves in the experience of discord. What that creates is greater strife and tension in relationships as the pressure cooker of one's inner emotional disturbance builds up over time, causing just devastating, life-changing events such as divorce, such as cheating on a loved one, such as addiction, such as alcoholism, and so forth. My analogy for projection is a baseball player that swings at every pitch that might hit him in hopes that he can avoid the pain of being hit by the pitch. Now, in the process, he not only increases the propensity of striking out, whereas taking the pitch would allow him to move to first base, but he also decreases the chances of helping his team win, which is his sole purpose as a team player. Now, although the pain of the errant pitch would be present while he was running the bases, he is much closer to the goal of scoring through his efforts, and he's supporting his team in becoming victorious. Now, think about striking out. If he swings at every pitch that's about to hit him in the fear, in the attempt to project that pain back out to the world, well, he's going to exacerbate the frustration because each and every time he does so, he brings himself closer to the inevitable failure that he is trying to avoid. And in addition to that, we have to realize that somebody who is constantly attempting to project out to the world the pain that they are too afraid to know, to experience, has likely been hurt before. Otherwise, how could you know what the pain of a pitch hitting you, or in this case, the pain of rejection actually felt like? So really, we have to understand that all these different states of reaction, primarily repression and projection, are the expression of one's experience of life over time. They are accumulative responses to our motor sensory environment. We have to understand that repression and projection represent cumulative emotional pattern dysfunction, representing our response to the sensory motor environment in which we are not only brought up, but grow into over time. What that means is we live in a cold world, y'all. This is not a pleasant place to be. And in order to survive, in order to have some semblance of a self at the end of the day, we have to take on these mechanisms of responding to our environment to ensure that somehow we have the emotional stability to get up in the morning, brush our teeth, make breakfast, make our bed, etc., etc. It is important to understand that the process of emotional aversion manifest as projection or rejection leads to detrimental physiological changes in the body. Hypothalamic pituitary adrenal dysfunction, or dysregulation, for example, refers to the dysfunction in our stress response system associated with allostatic load. Allostatic load can be thought of as the wear and tear that accumulates in the body as an individual is exposed to stressors, either chronic or acute. The primary driver of allostatic load is perception. In the event of feeling socially disconnected via an experience of rejection, our thalamus, which is a component of our brain, registers the sensory input of the situation and passes that information on to our amygdala. Our amygdala also known as our brain's smoke detector, then passes the information onto the hypothalamus, triggering a cascade of stress hormones to assist us in handling the threat before us. Our stress response system can become hyperactive in the case of PTSD, or let's say projection, or hypoactive in the case of inadequate response to a single stressor, meaning repressed emotion. In regards to rejection, it is abundantly clear that repeated exposure to rejection and social disconnection triggers many of the same limbic and emotional neuroplastic changes implicit in traumatic events. Now, to bring us back to this beautiful book, The Body Keeps the Score, I'd like to quote a brief passage that highlights the way in which our brain processes the changes, not only in the hypothalamus and our HPA axis, but also in the ventral vagal complex, as well as our default mode network and amygdala. Our social engagement system depends on nerves that have their origin in the brainstem regulatory centers, primarily the vagus, also known as the 10th cranial nerve, together with adjoining nerves that activate the muscles of the face, throat, middle ear, and voice box or larynx. This is known as the VVC, or ventral vagal complex. Any threat to our safety or social connection triggers changes in the areas innervated by the VVC. When a person becomes upset, the throat gets dry, the voice becomes tense, the heart speeds up, and respiration becomes rapid and shallow. This is abundant evidence of the fact that rejection can completely change the way in which our physiology, our body, responds to stress in our environment. And over time, repeated exposure to rejection without the proper mental and emotional integration of the unresolved emotions implicit in those experiences will lead us to a place of physiological disease and imbalance. We must learn, therefore, to express, to find diplomacy in representing for our feelings. It's so essential that we mitigate the effects of rejection, social isolation, and disconnection because they are unavoidable. This is not something that we can simply remove from life. This is something that is implicit even in the most subtle of human interaction. Think of the word express not only as a moniker for voicing our feelings, but as an adjective for the speed with which we can navigate rejection when voicing our opinion openly and honestly. Expression takes the form of being able to honestly reflect about how we are hurt, what made us feel that way, and how we experience the interactions and words of other people. Verbal acknowledgement is the first step to allowing this process to occur, and we must begin with ourselves. For before we advocate for ourselves in our interpersonal relationships, we must have the courage to be completely and totally frank with ourselves. To find our way back home to authentic self-confidence, self-assurance, and self-worth, we must employ succinct methods of emotional integration. The key to our ability to navigate rejection is not to avoid it altogether, which is another form of emotional repression, but to learn how to process the emotional upheaval it represents with grace and ease. First, we must learn how to allow ourselves to feel, or to be receptive to ourselves. In this instance, we give ourselves radical permission to experience the pain of rejection. This is something that most people avoid because it's so overwhelming, especially for those who have been traumatized. Now, there are a lot of different therapies that can help with the unraveling of this experience of rejection, which can often be quite painful. Now, some of the ways in which I like to do this from perhaps a more minor perspective, or the perspective of somebody who hasn't experienced such intense trauma, would be to journal and reflect, to meditate and communicate with oneself, to be fully present in the experience of pain, to find a rage room, perhaps a room where you can take out the anger and the rage, the frustration of rejection in a safe environment that allows you to truly let loose. Another way would be nature immersion, to immerse yourself in nature as a means of reconnecting back to the source of self-confidence and self-assurance, which of course is our connection to others, and nature is always available for connection. Now, another way we can do this is creating physical space. Physical space is essential for emotional integration and fully experiencing the pain of rejection, because living in the same space as a loved one who's hurt you, or perhaps living in any sort of situation where you are confronted by that same rejection each and every day, can be quite stressful to our nervous system. So creating physical space, perhaps taking a vacation or a trip, or perhaps just taking a drive, can be a great way to integrate whatever is going on in your heart and your mind. It is vital that we learn how to give ourselves what we need. In order to practice self-care and self-love, we must identify what we hope to gain from the recognition of which we were deprived in the process of being rejected. We must learn to not only integrate the emotions that we have experienced through honest self-communication and allowing ourselves to feel, but then we must take that to the next level by giving ourselves what we need, by telling ourselves not only what we needed to hear, but also giving ourselves the space to relax and integrate the newfound emotional freedom we've experienced by allowing ourselves to feel. One of the best ways in which we can practice self-care is by scheduling a massage. A massage is a wonderful way to not only de-stress, but allow our muscles to release all of the tension that they have accumulated in the process of integrating rejection, feeling emotions that are uncomfortable, and of course challenging ourselves to be better than ever before. Now, I want you to consider the fact that your issues are in your tissues. That means that the tissues in the body hold on to the stress of our emotional interactions, especially the fascia. So if you are into it, go find a Rolfing practitioner or a massage therapist who's highly skilled and can not only work out the knots and kinks in your body, but allow you to integrate yourself into a much deeper connection to self and to the ones in your life that you are working on creating greater connection with. Now, another way that I like to incorporate self-care and give myself what I need is by repeating kind affirmations, telling myself exactly that which I had hoped to hear from the other person. So let's say you ask a girl out on a date, and in the process of asking the girl out on the date, she says no. Well, next time that you go out to do something for yourself, let's say this act of self-care, before you go in, just say to yourself, you know, it's such an honor and a pleasure to be here with you on this journey, Zavidi, and I could not be more humbled and grateful to be here with you for this beautiful massage, and I hope that you have every bit of relaxation and integration that you are hoping for as a result of this. Now that's compassionate communication, rather than saying, oh, I'm such a piece of shit, I can't believe that that girl didn't want to go out with me because I'm ugly and I'm fat, and oh my God, I'm embarrassed to be on the massage table. If you can't tell, this is a narrative I've run before. You have to realize that the way we not only progress in our journey, but also learn to be the fulfilled and connected individuals we need to be in the world to lead with compassionate action and relentless self-love is by telling ourselves what we need to hear. Another great way to incorporate self-care is through flotation therapy. Flotation therapy involves relaxing in a sensory deprivation tank while floating in a saline solution. Flotation therapy is highly effective for regulating our autonomic nervous system, as well as reducing physical pain, improving cognitive function, and inspiring creativity. The third step in bringing ourselves back home to self-confidence and self-assurance is open communication. Having moved through the emotional receptivity and self-giving phases of emotional integration, we can now diplomatically advocate for ourselves with those who may have rejected us or not hurt us. One of the most important facets of open communication is speaking directly, not avoiding contortion or placating to the other person in an attempt to dull the blow of our experience, for we're innocent and compassionate beings. If we've been rejected by somebody and then we voice to them how we feel authentically about that rejection, we don't want to hurt them in the process. That is what our innocence desires, and truly I believe that's universal, and that of course people may do dastardly things and project and rage and do all these things that are counterproductive to healing, but in order to be as potent as we can be in our self-love practice, we must speak directly. We must avoid contortion. We must be honest with ourselves and other. Engage in nonviolent communication as a way of helping the other person to understand where you're coming from. Rather than projecting more blame and shame onto that person about how they interacted with you originally, just voice how you feel. Just be honest in your interaction and use the words such as my experience or I felt or this is brought up for me, rather than saying you did this and you made me feel and I wish you had. Don't pin it on them, just represent for where you are. Nature abhors a vacuum. The more you hold yourself in one space of light, of compassion, the more that the universe comes to you. Practice speaking your truth before you go into that interaction. It can be very helpful to sit down with yourself and look yourself in the mirror and pretend like you're the other person. Tell that person exactly how you feel, and it's nice actually to kind of get it out in a very raw form before you do that, rather than trying to sugarcoat it as you probably will try to do when you talk to the other person. Just be raw, open, and vulnerable, and you'll get all of that emotion out of the system before you go into the interaction where you need to show up as your best self. And of course, schedule a time to chat. Don't hit somebody up out of the blue and ask them to talk about things right away. Make sure that of course, find a time to chat with the person that may have rejected you, or find a time to chat with the person in your life that you're having trouble with. These rules apply to all interpersonal communication, not just rejection. Schedule a time to chat. Sit down with that person and say, look, I'd love to chat about what came up for me when you said XYZ. And if you're open to it, I'd love to chat at like Monday at 4:30, for example, or Tuesday at 5. Whatever it is, it doesn't really matter in terms of timing. The only thing that matters is that whatever it is, it doesn't really matter in terms of timing. It only matters that both parties are on the same page about the intention of the conversation. And it's so important that we clarify that up front. We can't go in and say, hey, do you want to just hang out at 5:30? And then try to bring this thing up. We have to say, hey, I really want you to know that I felt a little bit rejected and a little bit hurt by what you said earlier, and I'd love to speak about this then, and I'm hoping that we can both show up with an open heart and open mind for this conversation. That is emotional maturity. That is inspired self-mastery. That is what we are here to cultivate. Now, the final step is learning to receive. After diplomatically advocating for your experience of another person's behavior, it's really important to listen carefully to their response, to be fully present for their experience. It's vital that we learn how to do this, because if we want others to be fully present for us, we must first practice that with them. Another component of this to consider is when you are receiving somebody else's experience, understand that they'll probably have a different one from you. Your goal in interaction is not to prove somebody else wrong or to try to get them to see the way that you see, but just to represent for your opinion and then be fully present with them when they share theirs. Now, honestly, this is very difficult. Receiving somebody else, especially in a contentious situation when something that came up was actually quite hurtful to both parties, can be challenging. But I promise you, by practicing these tips and tricks, you'll have a much more effective and simple method of communication with the presence of discord in your life, as well as allowing greater connection and harmony in the long run in your interpersonal relationships. Here are the tips and tricks for learning how to receive somebody else's experience of rejection. Breathe into the feet while listening. This is very helpful for grounding us in the conversation, bringing our mind-body awareness to one still point, as well as allowing us to be fully engaged with the other person, fully present for what they share. Feel yourself in the chair. When you are listening to another person, don't slump, don't shake, don't swag, whatever you want to call it. Just be fully present by sitting upright, being tall and confident, and just take the words in with a great care for the heart that's listening to them, aka your own. Practice self-compassion in this moment. Sit with yourself in a way that is not only compassionate but indicative of how far you have come. Do not let the patterns of the past hold you back from diplomatically advocating for who you are while being the master who can receive everyone else's experience with a great ear of love. Look the other person in the eye. By looking the other person in the eye, we create greater emotional connection, and it shows the other person we are receptive to what they have to offer. And finally, once they've had their share, go ahead and reflect back to them what you heard. Don't just react and tell them how you feel about what they said. Try to clarify from a curious place, what exactly did you mean by that? I heard you say this. Is that correct? These are really powerful methods of nonviolent communication that allow us to create greater clarity, whereas a lot of rejection and a lot of discord just comes from plain old miscommunication, which is what we're here to mitigate by communicating clearly, first with ourselves and then with others. In conclusion, rejection exists only when we take on the feelings of hurt and abandonment associated with our inner quest to connect with another in place of self-connection. Now, I'm not suggesting we go around in life and the only thing we do is try to connect with ourselves and ignore other people. Our connection to other people is absolutely vital to our continued well-being. Instead, we have to understand that the feelings of rejection and hurt that are associated with somebody either not saying to us what we wanted to hear, or telling us no, or perhaps just telling us how it is, being honest with us, is often our own inner inability to connect with the most innocent and vulnerable aspects of ourselves and give them what they need to nourish them, to nurture them. When those parts of self are nurtured and integrated, we can connect with others in their experience of us without taking it personally. We can connect with them with grace and ease because we are fully embodied beings. The recognition that we seek is not inherent in the other person, but is inherent in the way we communicate with ourselves, in the ways in which we conduct our life, and the ways in which we take care of ourselves. That is the goal. That is what we're here to do. And obviously, easier said than done. This stuff takes years. But by employing the methods that I've offered in this video, I guarantee that you can make serious headway into navigating rejection, handling feelings of emotional pain, and learning what to do with them when they arise so that each and every time you may come up against a challenge in your life, you can move through it with greater skill and finesse than ever before. This has been Zavi D of Organic Health Movement presenting on navigating rejection. I hope you enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and we'll get at it soon. Peace.